Welcome, Jim and Bethany. Really glad to have you guys on here again. Thanks for sitting with us to give us an update. We'll start off on a fun note first because hunting seasons are opening up across the country. They've been open here for a few weeks in North Dakota, so curious what you guys have on the agenda for the season coming up.
Thanks, Renee. It's good to be here and making another update for our chapters. It's been a little while, so we do have a pretty fun hunt coming up for the women in the Washington, D.C. metro area. It'll be our 5th annual D.C. Ladies Pheasant Hunt on the eastern shore of Maryland. And it's we host it along with our partners at DU and a couple other conservation organizations, and we bring women from different aspects of public policy and Capitol Hill. A lot of them have never hunted before. It might be their very first time. So we're looking forward to that later this fall.
Thanks, Renee. What I'm most looking forward to is hunting with my son for the first time. So he turned 11 this spring, so he'll be up on hunting with me for the first time. We've done a little bit of dove hunting, and we'll be waterfowl hunting this weekend. So excited about that. And then I think I'm going to take a trip either to Iowa or South Dakota. I haven't decided yet here next month. So that's what I'm looking forward to here this hunting season.
Fun, good. I hear there's no birds in North Dakota, so good. Well, I'm gonna let you guys take the wheel from here to give us the lowdown on legislation movements as of late, so we can kick it off with the North American Grasslands Conservation Act, and then you guys can run with it from there. So if you could give us an update on all things that are going on, that'd be great.
You bet. So a little bit of a summer recap. The first thing we'll start off with is, as you mentioned, the North American Grasslands Conservation Act. It was introduced in the U.S. Senate at the end of July. It's Senate Bill 4639, introduced by Senators Ron Wyden from Oregon, Senator Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota, and Senator Michael Bennet from Colorado. And we're very grateful to those 3 senators and their staff for introducing this bill this Congress. It's very similar to the asks that we requested of Congress for this legislation to look like, what we've been talking to our members about for several years, trying to achieve. The program would authorize $290 million a year for grasslands and sagebrush ecosystems for habitat restoration, improvement, enhancement. The program would be very similar to the North American Wetlands Conservation Act. And so we're really excited. We're very optimistic that we're going to continue to see movement yet this Congress and likely well into next Congress. Our next step is for a House bill introduction. I think that's achievable with the remainder of time that we have left in this Congress by the end of the year. So that's the next step, and stay tuned on the Grasslands Act. In other news, we've talked for a lot of years, throwing some more acronyms out here, the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, RAWA. Everybody's pretty familiar with this program. We've talked about it so many times. It would fund state wildlife action plans. It's really important because it's a new source of federal funding for state agencies to accomplish projects like many of the projects that we at Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever work on at the state level. So RAWA has passed the House earlier this summer, and it's passed out of Senate committee. It's got one stop left in the Senate. And there are a few, one in particular, little windows left that it could possibly pass this Congress. It could be included in the continuing resolution yet this week. Doesn't look super likely, but it's a possibility. So, one of our biggest charges as the conservation community yet this fall is to try and pass the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, because once it passes the Senate, the president has signaled that he will sign it into law, and that would be a major conservation victory. So those are the 2 big legislative vehicles, pieces that we're working on right now, or at least on my side. I did want to kind of recap the National Youth Leadership Council's fly-in that we hosted in July. And the kids, you can see here in these pictures, that came back, talked about the Grasslands Act and Recovering America's Wildlife Act. We took them up to Capitol Hill and they were our advocates for these two programs. And they also talked about Farm Bill funding. They were in DC on the day the Grasslands Act was introduced in the Senate. It was super exciting. The kids did a wonderful job. Yeah, you can see, here we go. We've got everybody. We've got Ashlyn Ness from Minnesota, Trent Forrester from Georgia, Taylor Maxfield from Kansas, Carter LeBrant from Nebraska. And then, of course, we had Marissa Jensen on our staff and board member Dan Forrester. So the kids plus Marissa and Dan and Andrew and myself, we were on Capitol Hill for 3 days. You know, you can see they met with Senator Roger Marshall from Kansas. They met with Senator Deb Fisher from Nebraska. And the kids did a wonderful job, and we are just incredibly grateful to our chapters that support our work all around, but particularly when it comes to bringing the kids to DC. So with that, do we want to move on to some of the other happenings in DC? Here we go. There's a recent picture of Andrew and Jim and myself. In fact, that was last week. We were on Capitol Hill. The Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation had their annual banquet, and the three of us took a couple days to spend time in the U.S. Senate and the House and talk about our policy priorities, really emphasizing the upcoming Farm Bill. You can see the center picture there, awkward selfie, but we got to sit with Congressman Glenn Thompson from Pennsylvania. Jim and Andrew had his ear the entire evening. He's incredibly influential on the Ag Committee, and it was really awesome that we got to have his attention for the evening and talk conservation priorities. So I think with that, I will hand it over to Jim.
Thanks, Bethany. And just also to add that on another previous trip into DC, we are continuing to meet with folks at USDA. This is Chief Terry Cosby with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. We had met with him to basically thank him for the work on the Working Lands for Wildlife, and we just had some more funding into the Working Lands for Wildlife for bobwhite quail. So that was again earlier this summer. Just wanted to highlight some other things since our last update. Then we already talked about Marissa Jensen being in DC for the fly-in there with the NYLC, but she also had the opportunity to testify in front of the House Agriculture Committee to talk about Journey for Conservation Careers as we look at really trying to recruit the next generation of conservationists and those natural resources professionals that will work to deliver conservation programs, work for agencies, work for Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever. And so that was a great opportunity to testify there. Also this summer, then the House Agriculture Committee hosted a series of listening sessions across the country. One of the first ones was in Minnesota, where a couple of members of the Ag Committee, basically were hearing from the constituents and the landowners and farmers and partners. So Will Clayton, our rep up there in Minnesota, had the opportunity to offer some comments. And then there was another hearing in Ohio, up by Lake Erie, and we were also to provide some comments there. So these are going to continue here through the fall and into winter and into next year when we're talking about Farm Bill priorities, especially. And I also wanted to talk about that a lot of the times, as Bethany mentioned, we work with partners and host different events. The American Wildlife Conservation Partnership met this summer in Missouri, and it was hosted by Boone and Crockett and Bass Pro, where we had an opportunity. About 50 of the nation's wildlife and conservation groups got together to talk about our conservation priorities as we get into next year. It also happens to be the 50th anniversary of Bass Pro. So Johnny Morris and his wife were able to join us to celebrate the 50th anniversary there. And we presented him with an award, as he's done so much for so many of the conservation partners. So again, just an example of getting together, really working to develop platforms and priority conservation policy so that we can get it done, hopefully in the remainder of this Congress and next Congress. A little bit more on the Farm Bill itself. We did have several packages of funding that came up here this summer, and as we get into the end of the year, that are going to put some more funding into some of our favorite conservation programs. We talked about Working Lands for Wildlife and the environmental quality incentives programs. We're definitely going to see a bump in funding through this Congress and some of these packages that have moved forward. As we head in here to October 1st, that is the start of the next fiscal year. So fiscal year 23, and that kind of resets or adds the new acres and dollars into the federal budget. And so we're looking to get that started again as we headed into next year. So again, a lot of opportunities there. And we hope more, as Bethany said, if we can work on things like the Grassland Act and RAWA and all these things as we get into the first week of January. So with that, I'll turn it back to Renee.
That's great, you guys. I think I really only have one question for you, and it's the golden one. Is there anything that our members and our volunteers can do to assist the work that you're doing?
Yeah. So we had mentioned that kind of the two things that have an option or an opportunity that might move this fall, that being the Grasslands Act and the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. And we don't ask folks often to make a call or send an email, but if there is a real window where these are about to cross the finish line, or there's an important step to be taken where they could move legislatively, you may see an email from us asking you to make the call. Please do.
And as you're getting out there this fall, I mean, we have like Act for Grasslands, hashtag Act for Grasslands. If you haven't signed up your name to that, I mean, you can go to actforgrasslands.org and you can find some information there. But if you're out in the field with your friends and families, and use that hashtag. We also use one occasionally or often that's of CRP Works or Farm Bill. And as you're out there recreating and utilizing these great resources that we have, and you may be on CRP or an easement, conservation easement, then use that. And that really helps too. And then, as Bethany said, when the time comes, we'll ask you when needed. And definitely when we get into next year, that's when the Farm Bill discussion is really going to, ramp up. So thanks again.
All right. Well, great work, you guys. We always appreciate the work that your team is doing to advocate for conservation, as well as for sitting with us to share us all the updates and happenings in DC. So thank you again for your time, and we will see you for our next update.
Thanks, Renee.
Thanks, Renee.